Somewhere in an alternate universe, mankind had already conquered large portions of the universe ruled by the Emperor and the royal houses. Under the rule of the Emperor, many of the natives of the planets have been oppressed by the cruel lords. On one such planet, named the Arrakis, the ruling house called the Harkonnens has enforced their cruel rule over the natives, Fremen. The planet itself is a vast desert filled with the universe's greatest resource, spice. Over half a century of the Harkonnens' rule over Arrakis has seen them grow enormously rich, harvesting and selling the psychogenic spice. The Fremen have been trying to expel the Harkonnens, but to no avail. Recently, however, the Padishah Emperor, Shaddam IV, has ordered the Harkonnens to leave Arrakis. On the planet Caladan, Paul Atreides, the son of Duke Atreides and Lady Jessica, wakes up to one of his recurring dreams about a strange Fremen girl. He then heads to dinner with his mother, who is a member of the quasi-religious order of the Bene Gesserit. The cult has a special power called the Voice, which can be used to command anyone to do anything. Jessica has been trying to teach her son the extraordinary powers of her order. She tests Paul like every other day, and Paul, albeit reluctant, is partially successful. After the brief session with his mother, Paul learns about the planet Arrakis. Recently, the Emperor has taken the planet from the Harkonnens and handed it to the House Atreides. Paul and his family were to go there to take stewardship of the planet and its people soon. Paul learns Arrakis is the only source of the psychoactive spice, which extends life and perception. Spice is also necessary for interstellar travel instantly from one planet to another, making it the most valuable resource in the entire universe. Later, a formal envoy from the Emperor arrives at Caladan, who formalizes the awarding of Arrakis to House Atreides. In recent times, House Atreides has been popular among the royal houses and has been growing in political influence in the universe. The Emperor fears the growing power of the House Atreides, which is why he wants to create chaos in the house. The Duke recognizes that his appointment to oversee Arrakis is a trap of some kind, set up by the Emperor to subdue his growing influence. However, he cannot refuse an imperial offer. At the Royal Air Station, Paul meets his friend, the elite soldier Duncan Idaho, and requests to take him along when Duncan goes to Arrakis, in his reconnaissance mission to Arrakis a few weeks ahead. Naturally, Duncan refuses. He would be court-martialed if he sneaked the heir to the house on a risky mission like that. Paul then confides the real reason he wants to go with Duncan. He explains he's been having dreams about Arrakis and the Fremen, including one where Duncan falls in battle. Paul believes the dream to be some call from the future and wishes to accompany Duncan so that he can be of aid if such misfortune is to occur. Duncan laughs off the young heir's warning as a dream and heads on his mission. When his attempts to sway Duncan fails, Paul goes to convince his father to let him leave for Arrakis, but the Duke refuses as well. He wishes Paul to be by his side with the political situation. The Emperor has set up a conflict between House Atreides and House Harkonnen, and a war will most likely happen. This war will definitely weaken both houses, to the benefit of the Emperor. In such a volatile time, he cannot let his son, the future rule of House Atreides, travel alone. The Duke reveals he intends to strike an alliance with the Fremen in order to harness their desert power to his own and outwit the Emperor. Later that day, Gurney has a sparring session with Paul. Usually, Duncan would have taken these sessions, but in his absence, Gurney fills the spot. Compared to Gurney, Paul is not ready for a proper battle, but he does show some promise. That night, Paul dreams once again of the same Fremen girl. This time, he sees himself with a girl in the desert where they kiss. Midway through the kiss, the girl stabs him and he falls, waking up in the real world. Jessica's Bene Gesserit superior, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, arrives on Caladan to test Paul. The sect has never allowed its members to bear male children, which is why Paul needed to be tested if he was worthy to inherit their power. Before the meeting, the young heir is inspected by Suck Doctor Wellington Ye, who warns Paul that the Bene Gesserit have their own agenda, despite working for the Emperor. Jessica then takes Paul to the room where Helen is waiting for them. She seems terrified of the woman and is visibly shaken as he leaves her son inside the room, commanding him to obey Helen. Jessica then stands outside, crying in fear, chanting, Fear is the mind killer. Once Jessica leaves, Helen commands the boy to approach her. Paul refuses to obey. She uses the voice on him instantly, bringing him to his knees. She then makes him put his hand inside a weird box and points a poison needle to his neck. If Paul so much so as moves his hand out of the box, he would be dead. The box, or the pain box, is used to judge his character. If he is too weak to suffer pain and acts like an animal, he would die. If he exhibits patience, he lives. Paul manages to bear through the pain. After the test, Helen asks Paul about his dreams and whether they sometimes come true. Paul has no answer to this. Later on her way back, Helen berates Jessica for producing a son for Duke Leto, rather than the daughter she had been ordered to produce. She accuses Jessica of thinking her son might be the Kwisatz Haderach, the fulfillment of a Bene Gesserit messianic prophecy. Helen warns her, Paul's abilities are not fully developed and he might die in the coming trials. Regardless, she and her sect has made all the required preparations for him to succeed in Arrakis. When Helen leaves, Paul confronts his mother about what Mohia meant. Jessica explains how the Bene Gesserit have spent hundreds of years engaged in a selective breeding program to produce an unparalleled mind who can see both the past and the future, called Kwisatz Haderach. The Bene Gesserit believes that this person will bring true balance to the universe. The Atreides arrive on Arrakis with several hundreds and thousands of locals already waiting to welcome them, a rule imposed upon them by their previous rulers. When the family disembarks their ship, the locals begin chanting a phrase Paul cannot recognize. Paul asks his mother and she explains that it's a local prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from outer world, a prophesized messiah on Arrakis. Paul dismisses the whole thing as a superstition that was probably spread by Helen and her sect member. Helen, after departing from Caladan, heads straight to the Harkonnens, where Vladimir Harkonnen, the Duke of the House, is not pleased with the Emperor's decision. He knows that it is a strategy from the Emperor and the Atreides have nothing to do with it. Yet the hunger for more riches from the deserts of Arrakis leaves him no choice but to follow the Emperor's subtle ploy. Helen arrives in the Harkonnen halls and assures Vladimir that the Emperor will support them with his army against the Atreides. However, she tells Vladimir to spare Jessica and Paul in return for the Emperor's help. Vladimir agrees. However, he doesn't intend to let Paul live. Back at Arrakis, Jessica hires a Fremen servant who sees Jessica and Paul as a fulfillment of the Lisan al-Gaib. The woman shakes and cries as she hands Jessica a dagger made from the tooth of the Shai Hulud, the immense sandworms which make the deserts of Arrakis so dangerous. Elsewhere, while he studies a holographic image of the desert mouse, Paul notices a weird mechanical fly in his room. He instantly recognizes it as an assassination tool and blends in with the holographic screen before him. The fly, aka Hunter Drone, cannot seem to recognize, or rather differentiate, between the hologram and Paul. This gives Paul the opportunity to smash the drone when a servant enters the room and the drone targets her instead. The Harkonnens were already at work. On the other hand, Duke Leto surveys his new domain and discovers that the Harkonnens have sabotaged much of the needed infrastructure. Without them, they would not make the money to sustain themselves in this harsh world. So they decide to take the issue to the Imperial Arbiter of the Transition named Liet Kynes. Leto's party meets with Liet Kynes to investigate the spice mining operations. She inspects their still suits and finds that Paul has intuitively fitted his still suit in the Fremen manner. In the native language, she says, "He shall know your ways as if born to them." It is almost as if Paul matched every description of their so-called Fremen savior. The party flies out to observe a spice mining operation where Liet explains how the whole infrastructure works and the benefits and risks involved. The worm is one of the greatest risks to their mining business. Worms are prevalent throughout Arrakis and are attracted by the rhythmic sounds of the machines. These worms destroy everything in their paths. Just then, they see that the mining vehicle has attracted a worm. When a flying carryall fails to remove the mining vehicle, Duke Leto lands a small squad of planes nearby to rescue the miners. Like a true ruler, he prioritizes the safety of his people before his own. Paul too gets out to guide the miners inside. he is hit with a massive dose of spice blown along with the sand. The spice starts making Paul hallucinate, and he is nearly sucked down into the sand with a crawler when Gurney grabs him and hauls him aboard his father's aircraft. The two watch as the worm swallows the sandcrawler whole. A few nights later, Duke Leto awakes at night unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. He gets up to see his servant stabbed to death, and just as he turns, he is also shot with a paralytic dart that burrows its way through his body shield and into his back. Yue, the family doctor, reveals himself as a traitor. He also admits to having lowered the shields and cut off Atreides' communications to their home planet of Caladan. No help will arrive. Gurney wakes up in a frenzy and leads the counterattack as the Harkonnen forces, aided by the Imperial Sardaukar troops, begin their assault. The Atreides troops, caught unprepared and massively by Harkonnen troops in the Sardaukar, find themselves quickly overwhelmed. The Emperor had played his hand and kept his promise to the Harkonnen. The battle rages on. Duncan shows great resilience and kills several of the Imperial and Harkonnen soldiers. Duncan somehow manages to take control of an aircraft and tries to rescue Paul and Jessica, but finds them already gone. Vladimir, having promised the Bene Gesserit that he will not harm Paul or Jessica, sends some of his men to take them and leave them in the desert. The Baron plans to let the mother and son die of thirst and hunger. The soldiers have taken special care to subdue the mother and son. They know of the Bene Gesserit powers and tie Jessica's mouth shut. However, having never seen a man wield the same powers, leave Paul as is. Paul, not fully sure of his abilities, is still able to use the voice to order one of the men to remove his mother's gag. Jessica immediately orders one of the men to kill his comrade. She then frees herself and kills two of the remaining ones personally. The mother and son then try and use the aircraft to return, but it crashes into the desert. When they rise to the sandy surface of the desert, they see the devastation of Arakan from a distance. With the Harkonnen army victorious and the Atreides destroyed, Yue apologizes and reveals to his duke that he only worked with the Harkonnens as they had his wife and kids captured. The doctor does one last favor for Leto and replaces one of his teeth with a poison capsule, which he hopes the duke will use to kill the Baron. Yue then meets with Baron, demanding the man to honor his end of the deal. Vladimir, however, slits the doctor's throat. The Baron, along with his men, sit down at a huge dining table with a paralyzed Leto. The Baron starts gloating over Leto, who bites down on his fake tooth and expels the poison, killing everyone in the room. Even with all that, the Baron still manages to survive, stuck to the ceiling like a cocoon. Medical technicians nurse the Baron back to health. Riding out a storm in a survival tent, Paul continues to have visions from his spice exposure. At first, he still dreams of the same Fremen girl, but soon the visions turn into nightmares of bloody conflict and religious zealots, operating beneath an Atreides flag. Paul and Jessica are eventually rescued by Duncan Idaho, who managed to escape the slaughter. Duncan brings them to Kynes, who has set up an abandoned terraforming station occupied by Fremen. Unfortunately, the Sardaukar track them there and attack, with the Fremen killing many of them. Duncan sacrifices himself in a last stand to allow Paul, Jessica, and Kynes to escape. Paul and Jessica flee in an aircraft. Kynes, however, stays back after she is mortally injured. She intends to bring a sandworm to attack the remaining soldiers and bring them to their doom. While flying through a powerful sandstorm, Paul has a vision of a Fremen man giving him advice, telling him that survival in the desert is a process and that he must move with the flow of the environment. Paul, in a moment of madness, allows the aircraft to be carried deeper into the desert by the vortex of the storm. Miraculously so, they survive the sandstorm. However, the craft has crashed and is in no shape to fly again, so the mother and son set out on foot. Jessica and Paul decide to take help from the Fremen and head to where they believe the Fremen siege is. However, traveling through the desert is no ordinary task, and just when they are about to reach the Fremen, their movements attract a sandworm. The sandworm pauses, seemingly looking at Paul for a few seconds before a thumper draws it away. Soon as the worm leaves, the mother-son duo is captured by a group of Fremen led by Stilgar, one of the Fremen leaders who had visited them earlier when they first arrived to Arrakis. Stilgar believes them to be of higher rank and doesn't want to touch them. But another one of the Fremen, named James, wants to kill them and loot their stuff. Paul recognizes James and the girl named Chani from his dreams. Stilgar offers to allow Paul, who is still young, to join their siege, but says that Jessica must be left behind. He believes her to be too old and useless in battle as well. However, the mother and son prove them wrong by using the Bene Gesserit training to disarm most of the Fremen. They even manage to hold Stilgar at knife point. Stilgar, realizing that Jessica is a Bene Gesserit, relents and decides to take both of them to the group. Jamis, however, objects and is adamant to kill them. He challenges Jessica to a duel. Paul agrees to stand as Jessica's champion. Chani takes pity on Paul, who she believes will die at Jamis' hand, and gives him her knife. The dagger is a unique one, and explains it to be a dagger made from the tooth of the sandworm. This was one of the moments from Paul's visions. The same dagger that the girl used to stab him with. In the duel, Paul outclasses Jamis. He doesn't want to kill Jamis and repeatedly holds a knife to his throat and demanding that he yield. However, he soon realizes that in Fremen tradition, duels only end with death. He has never killed a single person in his life and cannot comprehend the task before him. Regardless, apologetic to his deed, Paul kills Jamis. Finally, Paul and Jessica are accepted to the group. Paul and Jessica see a Fremen impossibly riding a worm. As they begin their journey into the desert, Chani tells Paul that this is only the beginning.